Good morning, everyone. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. Shakespeare's classic, and some classics never run out of style, do they?
Yeah, but no, we're not here for a debate about fate and freedom. We're not here to provide explanations and analysis on the events of our time. We are here actually to slow down time, examine our movement, and dream in some way the future together. And that's the promise of our generation. Should we now go on to
Can
the
we project
topic?
the presentation? The last 2 years, the world has been shaken up like it hasn't been in a century. We've had to rethink our values, examine our priorities, and rewire the days of our lives. Amidst this period of chaos, just as we are recovering from the sorrows of loss and adjusting to a new way of life, we saw the largest influx of capital come into our ecosystem. We changed the order and the math when it comes to money, scale, and importance. And then came the fear of a downturn. We went from the exuberance of counting unicorns and the caution of winter is coming.
Will the shock, the ups and downs continue? Will this, I think, our constant feeling of disorientation ever fade away into blissful normalcy? Does all of this matter, right? Do we even want this up and down that we've been seeing over the last few years?
This
We have to,
everyday breaking news, the constantly churning rumor mill, which just seems to have replaced reality, and the dying need to be relevant and important. None of it matters. It's a distraction, a din in our ear that is affecting our perspective.
we have really have to zoom out time to really understand what matters here, as you can see, right? We're in this small bubble here and then getting all worked up on it. The world has seen ups and downs of all kinds, and it's very tempting to analyze data and in some ways build empirical models to predict the future. The future does not need to be predicted, though, right? It needs to be dreamed and willed and acted upon to be realized.
And we cannot let the pace of change distort our perspective of the future. We have to examine the moment we're in, history, and look into the future, not years, but decades from now. Breaking the old benchmark, the old standard, the record does not take time, but can just as easily be redefined. Building monuments, legacies take time and they last. Individuals end up focusing on breaking records and doing better, but the society should focus on building monuments. Why us? Why now? Why can't we follow the path of self gratification and design our lives around beating the person that's ahead of us? Why shouldn't accomplishment be defined around competition and individual success? Why carry the burden of an entire society? These are important questions that go to the core of individual preferences and happiness. That said, we should also acknowledge that technology and the information age has obliterated barriers, decimated arbitrage opportunities, and accelerated the pace of change. This only means that focus on relative grading and individual accomplishment means short lived successes, constant anxiety and stress of being overtaken, and a constant feeling of suspicions of our fellow citizen. Does it really feel good? So, what will? A strong sense of purpose that shifts the focus from winning to building. We could not live in a better place and time for it.
Look, there's enough and more skeptics that question the infrastructure. We condemn our political system. We criticize any action, but all of them could not be more wrong, right? Every country, every society has just epoch where just one or two generations, have actually built great monuments, works of art, stockpile of wealth. Let's go to the beginning, right? Most of the European continent was built on the stock of wealth over the last 2 centuries, driven by industrialization and actually colonization. America did that in a century with great philanthropists as well as robber barons of the Gilded Age, with both scientific and financial acumen. China more recently took the last half century, which was built on infrastructure, scientific advancement, and steered by the will of the state. All of them came with their critics and mishaps, but have been built in this period the foundations of infrastructure and wealth that has formed the backbone of global world order. Right. We are actually in the beginning years of this moment in India, and that, in some ways, is the promise of our generation.
Why is this moment so great? Let's look at the chart. We have the youngest population in the world that is digitally savvy, aware of the world, born into a time where the normal boundaries of geography, information, and access are starting to fade away, where technology is the watchword for progress, where life goes beyond surviving and focuses on thriving. Second, a population that is just as diverse in its preferences as it is in its skill and ambition. There are no organized groups of power. There is no scope for mass manufacture of a single kind of product. Yet, amidst all the diversity, there is a common thread of values and aspiration. Values that, despite religion and caste differences, remain the same. Values that are feared to be forgotten and given away to the tyranny of intolerance. Values that are worth protecting and forming the driving force of the future. This moment in time, where opportunity, aspiration, and capacity come together, is very unique. For us in India, we don't see this in any other country today. It is precious and one that needs to be made the most of. But this is neither simple nor easy. It requires us to cut through the demagoguery and timidity. It requires us to move past intolerance, the constant one-upmanship, and the temptation to take the shortcut. It requires a strong sense of purpose, the need for intensity and perseverance to get it right, and the patient past barriers and daily ups and downs.
Look, what does all this mean for us, right? How do we look at this purpose in a new light? How do we convert all of this discourse into action? And how do we break the large mission into like smaller pieces and steps? To figure all of this out, right? Let's start at the very beginning, right? We must be just very smart to analyze and understand from the lessons of history, as we should be crazy to dream and imagine how we can build on it. At the heart of all of this actually has been the relationship between not money and economy, but money and society. It's been complicated with its ups and downs and evolved and changed forms, but the core of all of it is actually power. The source of power has actually moved from the divine right of kings to the courage of conquerors to landed gentry to like the savvy of traders, and more recently to the current day tech entrepreneurs. All of this is all driven again by arbitrage and control. And all of these arbitrages fall away. And in some ways, as some of this falls away and the barriers are obliterated, power moves from control to influence, from being concentrated in the hands of few to groups of many. This process is just as messy as it's accelerating and brings with it a shift in the very foundations of capitalism.
Economics started off as a framework for defining this entire relationship with capital and society, but with business as an anchor. It encompassed the eccentricities of human behavior, the complexities of societies, and in some ways, the metaphysical philosophy of what meant to be human. But somewhere along the way, economics isolated itself in the walls of analytical rigor, empirical evidence, and in some ways forgot its grounding in social sciences. We relook at the core principles of economics that needs a paradigm shift and understands its implications to the tenets of business building. Number one, the analytical platform of economics was built on this dual leg of capital and labor. Resource in some ways was thought of as infinite and a place of a wealth extraction. This flaw led to significant depletion of our resources and caused a lot of pollution. It actually affected life-sustaining resources like air and water. It is about time to give resource its due place and reverence and shift it towards regenerative applications. The second, this whole concept of price discovery, cost curves, profit, loss, these are all the basics of market economics, which solve for local optima and the then and there. Well, this is a great framework to understand ideal markets. Markets are never ideal. They are in fact complex systems that continuously evolve and cannot fit in a two-dimensional framework. We need to shift and look at markets as complex systems with evolving components and actors that are trying to find their own sense of equilibrium. The third, the rational consumer, the most favorite topic of every economist out there. It's long been the cornerstone of the defining economic actor. The consumer is a reductive form of characterizing actors in the economy, and it excludes the social nature of human existence. We need to shift the understanding of actors in the ecosystem to actors in the ecosystem as a whole to preferences of a single rational consumer.
Yeah, so what we're seeing in terms of what needs to happen in all of these changes, right? So how do we affect some of this, right? These shifts in thinking need to find their way into business principles, right? Business needs to move from the scrappiness of just like, it actually, in fact, historically moved from the scrappiness of most visionary entrepreneurs who broke new ground to theory and textbooks of business school graduates. We have nothing against them. But the reimagining of axioms of businesses of next era will need us to push our boundaries of comfort and question in some way the status quo. The first one is that we have to redefine the temporal orientation of business objectives towards more long term. Like quarterly results, market speculation of companies' value has driven the vagaries of market, and it's led to a lot of the turbulence that we've seen over the last few decades. The second one, though, is the change of the purpose of the business from the exploiting of the arbitrage to making the overall system better. What are we thinking here? What we are saying here is we are seeking global optima. We are seeing global maxima over a period of time. The third one is actually, again, derived from the rational customer topic that Vaidhehi just talked about. But in some ways, in changing the goals of the business from maximizing shareholder value to like maximizing value creation in the ecosystem, you will need an ecosystem view towards it, right? Shifting towards building for all ecosystem play participants increases the defensibility of the business much beyond the temporary advantages and crowd sentiment.
How do these principles of economics and business help us design the future? What is the future of business? Who wins, really? The future of business is not going to manifest from incremental changes of the past, but actually from a transformative force that redraws the scaffolding of value chains, fundamentally altering the way we do things. This may sound unsettling, but when it in fact, it unlocks. Technology has bestowed on us this luxury. It has not only broken the barriers of information, geography, access, etc., but it has reduced cost of production, distribution, and transaction, and redefined the source and value of money and currency. This allows us to shift the balance of power from what is available to what is wanted and needed. It disallows the hoarding of resources and information and opens it up, letting thousand flowers bloom. Web3, NFT, crypto, blockchain, the buzzwords that have become synonymous with the future are all, in a way, a manifestation of a decentralized power and influence system, a realization of the preferences of society unbounded by constraints. We need to build the reimagined scaffolding for this. One, that the flow of goods and information is through a network with equitable access, responsible engagement, and sustainable resource utilization. We call it the operating system. The operating system is not the owner of anything, but the designer and the custodian of the environment where stakeholders interact. The operating system is built heavily relying on design and agility over brute force execution. It requires for a deep understanding of the system, the ability to learn and adapt, and a keen sense of responsibility and purpose. The operating the system does not suffer from the vagaries of the market, does not sway with the winds of speculation, and does not die with changing circumstances. It stands the test of time, creates significant value for its stakeholder, including its shareholders, and in the end, makes the world a better place.
These concepts may sometimes like feel a little theoretical or in some ways impossible, at the very least lacking in applicability. It needs the direction of purpose, innovation in design, and the process of meticulously converting uncertainty to risk, right? And this is where capital plays a critical role as a steward of this process, right? This is where like we've spent a lot of time as Lightrock and our avatars before to think about what the future role of capital can be. So how do we reimagine the role of capital? Uh, it's in some ways a series of processes and steps, right? The first is how do we think about purpose and in defining solution? How do we not use the solution and then find as a hammer and then find a nail? And therefore we now have a significant set of goals globally with the SDGs, etc., that actually sets a bunch of actions that over a period of time lead to a better society, lead to the next generation of people living more with a better quality of life and prosperity. And so the first idea of this is actually to get to a solution, right? What is important then, as we embrace new economics, is to find a design process that actually transitions this solution to a responsible business. It's important to like underscore responsibility here because that in some ways is going to be the trademark or the hallmark of businesses that are going to embrace an economics that thinks about society more deeply. The role of equity, which is very crucial here after that, which is where like we've spent a lot of time, is actually to transform uncertainty into risk. How do you think about new ideas and potentially like give it a financial discipline so that what potentially is a bunch of options then gets to tradable risk? And that's in some ways the significant role that equity plays here. And again, how do we embrace the elements of the new economic theory that we're talking about is still very significant in how we work through this. But all of this, in the scheme of things, comes from purpose, design, and then what the role of equity is. What we're super excited in our partnership with Yubi now is actually the ability to then take what equity has unlocked and then massify it. How do you reprice risk as more and more entrants understand the value of what equity has unlocked? And this is where we see that while equity has a significant role in unlocking new things, the role of debt markets to actually reprices, to actually like create enough massification of what business models have been in some ways unlocked by equity is in some ways very important. And this is our long-standing partnership as an equity investor, as well as a thought partner in us co-creating how we can democratize debt, not just from the perspective of increasing more access to credit in the market, but also in terms of being a prime mover in understanding how we unlock businesses for the next like 20 years and in towards realizing the promise of the generation.
In some ways, we started off talking about today's sentiment, kind of zoomed out, looked at time, looked at our responsibility, and talked through how we can, in some ways, realize it. A lot of this still, while much in progress through the work we do through, again, our portfolio companies like Yubi, still remains to be seen through quite a bit. We play a very important and privileged role as stewards of progress in society. We bear with us the responsibility to ourselves, the generations that came before us, and that the ones that will come after. We have the opportunity to enable our fellow citizens to grow into their best selves and live happy and joyous lives. The promise of our generation is not a choice, but the reality of our lives. It is a tremendous responsibility and the rubric on which we will be judged for generations to come. It far surpasses the importance of self and individuals, but gets us together towards a larger mission and goal of humanity itself.
Thank you. This is
Thank
all
you,
I
everyone.
had.